The wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows and tearing tree limbs from their roots as rain slammed against rooftops with a deafening roar. Lightning cracked across the night sky, illuminating the street in harsh white flashes that revealed chaos in frozen snapshots. Trash bins toppled, patio chairs airborne, and branches strewn like skeletons on the ground. In the midst of the fury, a woman's voice pierced through the noise, raw and desperate. "Emily!" She screamed, stumbling barefoot through knee-high puddles, soaked to the bone, her eyes wide with terror. Her breaths came in sobs, mixing with the storm's fury as she frantically scanned the street, yelling again, "Emily, baby, where are you?" Porch lights flickered on one by one, windows cracked open just slightly, silhouettes peeking through blinds, some faces lit by the eerie glow of phone screens. But no one stepped out. No one dared to help. The neighborhood had turned into a ghost town, watching, not acting. And in that eerie stillness between thunderclaps, the mother's cry echoed again, shattered by a sudden scream. Barely audible, but it was there. A child's voice. Faint. Frightened. "Mom!" Flashlights flicked on, bobbing in the distance. Sirens approached, slow, cautious, as if the storm might lash out at them next. Water rushed along the gutters like a small river, and somewhere beneath a flickering street lamp, a dark shape began to form. A wheelchair, tilted slightly, one wheel caught in a crack along the sidewalk, and slumped in it, arms curled tightly around her soaked frame, was Emily, just 10 years old, her face pale and frozen with fear, her braces glinting in the flashes of lightning. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her fingers trembled violently against the metal frame. Her mother dropped to her knees in the rising water, wrapping herself around her daughter with a sound that was half scream, half prayer. "She's here. I found her. Oh my God, she's freezing. Somebody help." But there was no rush of feet, no rush of aid. The neighbors still stood behind their curtains, watching, silent. A man, 2 houses down, slowly backed away from his window and turned off his porch light. One paramedic arrived, shouting over the wind as he jumped from a van. "How long has she been out here?" he asked, wrapping Emily in a thermal blanket and checking her pulse. The mother, unable to answer, just kept whispering, "She was inside. I swear she was inside. I told her not to open the door. Why was she out here? Who put her out here?" And then came the answer, not from a neighbor, not from an eyewitness, but from the flickering screen of a nearby doorbell camera. The grainy footage later played on news outlets across the state. It showed a woman standing in a pressed HOA windbreaker, arms folded coldly across her chest, pointing toward the lawn as little Emily wheeled herself out. The woman said nothing, but as Emily paused on the porch, frightened by the first drops of rain, the woman gestured again, sternly, then turned and walked away, locking the community gate behind her. The reporter's voice would later echo over that very footage. In a chilling act of cruelty, this child, diagnosed with cerebral palsy, was left outside during one of the strongest storms in the state this year by her neighborhood's HOA president, all to enforce policy. But back on that night, the only thing that mattered was the way Emily's body shook as the ambulance doors closed behind her. The mother, still drenched, stood on the sidewalk, clutching the child's damp backpack, her lips moving in silent rage and disbelief. A neighbor finally opened their door and stepped out, but the mother didn't even look. Her eyes were locked on one thing, the HOA clubhouse across the street. Its lights were still on. Its flag still fluttered in the storm. And through the glass door, the figure of Karen, dry, calm, untouched by the storm, stood watching them. No emotion, no regret, just control. Cold, calculated control. It would take days for the truth to come out. But in that single, soaked, heart-shattering moment, one thing was certain: this wasn't an accident. This was punishment. And whatever point Karen thought she was making, it nearly cost a disabled child her life. We weren't always the type of family that stood out. In fact, we prided ourselves on being simple, grounded people. My husband Ryan and I met during our first year at college, 2 broke kids who bonded over late-night instant noodles and a shared love of old rock ballads. From the moment we met, I knew we'd build something solid together. We got married right after graduation, moved into a tiny apartment with stained carpets and leaky pipes, and just took life as it came. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just us working hard, building quietly. When Emily came along, our world shifted in the most unexpected, beautiful way. She was born a little early, for weeks to be exact. The doctors told us we might face some challenges, and we did. Emily was eventually diagnosed with cerebral palsy. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital room, holding her tiny hand, and wondering how we'd get through it. But the truth is, Emily didn't need our strength nearly as much as we needed hers. That little girl lit up every room she rolled into. She had this quiet determination, this sparkle in her eyes that could melt the hardest heart. She didn't walk like other kids, but she dreamed even bigger. She couldn't run on a playground, but she painted entire galaxies with her brushstrokes. She was and still is our miracle. We lived in a modest neighborhood for the first 10 years of her life, tight community, decent school district, small backyard where Emily could sit under the tree and read books for hours. But as she grew older, her needs changed. We wanted her to be closer to a better medical facility, and we needed a house that could be fully adapted, wider doorways, no stairs, a custom ramp out front. So after much saving and planning, we found what seemed like the perfect solution. A beautiful single-story home in a newly developed community on the edge of town. It was clean, quiet, modern, and according to the brochure, built with family in mind. The neighborhood fell under a homeowners association, but we weren't too worried. The rules seemed reasonable. Keep your grass trimmed, don't paint your house neon green, no barking dogs after 10 p.m. That kind of thing. Nothing outlandish, at least not on paper. Our first week there felt like something out of a Hallmark movie. Neighbors came by with welcome baskets, bottles of wine, fresh muffins, even a handwritten note from someone named Karen on the HOA board. Kids waved from across the street. Retired couples stopped by with gardening tips and long-winded stories about HOA potlucks. It was warm, inviting, safe. At least it felt that way. Emily immediately fell in love with the tree-lined sidewalks. She'd roll herself up and down the block with her sketchbook resting on her lap, waving at neighbors like she'd known them forever. She especially loved the community park, a small green area with a swing set, flower beds, and a fountain. For her, it was a quiet escape. For us, it was peace of mind. But like most perfect pictures, the cracks began to show. It started subtly. We'd get a note on our door from the HOA about our ramp being out of visual harmony with the rest of the neighborhood. I remember reading that phrase 3 times, trying to figure out what it even meant. We had installed a custom, polished wooden ramp with black railings. It blended beautifully with the house. But apparently, it interfered with community cohesion, whatever that meant. Then came the flags. Emily had a small rainbow flag on her window, a symbol of support, love, and inclusion. The same week it went up, we received another note. Exterior displays not approved by the HOA are subject to removal. We noticed similar flags in other homes weren't being targeted, just ours. Still, we let it go. We told ourselves not to overthink it, that maybe we just needed more time to blend in. And then there was Karen. She introduced herself formally at the first HOA meeting we attended. Impeccably dressed, clipboard in hand, always smiling. But her eyes didn't smile. They scanned, assessed, judged. Karen had a way of talking at people rather than to them. She welcomed us with a handshake that lasted just 1 second too long, complimented my dress in a tone that didn't feel like a compliment, and asked about Emily in that soft, performative voice that made my skin crawl. "Oh, she's just adorable," she said, bending slightly to Emily's level. "You must be so brave, sweetie. I don't know how your mother does it. You poor thing." Emily stared at her silently, her hand tightening around her wheelchair armrest. It was always like that with Karen. Every smile was stiff. Every bless your heart came with a backhanded judgment. She was always there, walking her dog exactly when Emily was painting on the sidewalk, attending every meeting, hovering near our property during inspections. Never directly aggressive, never loud, but always watching. always controlling. The other neighbors remained friendly, but a noticeable distance began to grow. Invitations to community events dwindled. Kids who once played catch near our yard stopped showing up. Some parents pulled their children away when Emily rolled up to say hi. One even whispered, "Don't stare, it's rude," as if Emily's presence was something to be ashamed of. We began to understand. This neighborhood wasn't about community, it was about conformity. There was one time we installed a small garden bed in our front yard, just a few flowers that Emily picked out herself. She wanted butterflies to come, wanted to paint them. Karen left a printed notice on our door the next day. Unapproved landscaping. Must be removed within 72 hours. It was never about rules. It was about control. Still, we tried to be cordial. We kept our yard tidy, followed every policy, smiled at every neighbor, showed up at meetings even when we didn't want to. But Karen always found something new to comment on. Our mailbox being too bright, our trash bins being brought in too late, Emily's medical van blocking sightlines. She wanted us to feel small, and for a while it worked. But the one thing Karen never understood was that Emily wasn't fragile. Yes, she used a wheelchair. Yes, she had trouble with motor control. But emotionally, that girl was steel wrapped in sunshine. She didn't cry when other kids ignored her. She didn't complain when adults looked at her with pity instead of respect. She just kept sketching, kept smiling, kept rolling forward. She once told me, "Mom, I think I'm the only colorful thing in this neighborhood." And she meant it as a compliment to herself. She knew who she was. She never let them take that from her. We didn't know then what Karen would become. We didn't know how far she'd go just to maintain her illusion of power. We thought we were dealing with a petty, controlling woman with too much time on her hands. We thought the worst she could do was throw passive-aggressive notes and dirty looks. We were wrong. What happened during that storm wasn't just a result of a bad policy or a misunderstood rule. It was the culmination of every fake smile, every little rule weaponized, every quiet moment where cruelty dressed up as order. It was Karen proving a point, and she chose our daughter to prove it. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing with people like Karen. They don't burn bridges. They quietly set them on fire with a smile, one match at a time. And by the time you smell the smoke, you're already standing in the ashes. At first, her actions were so subtle, they felt almost accidental. A miscommunication, a misunderstanding. Maybe she was just misunderstood. But deep down, I think we always knew. The signs were there. Small power plays wrapped in kindness, control hidden behind concern. The first Rail warning came in the form of a notice slipped into our mailbox just 2 weeks after we moved in. Violation number 14. Unapproved modification, entryway ramp. It looked official with the HOA letterhead, signature block, and a copy of the neighborhood guidelines attached. We had submitted plans before we installed Emily's wheelchair ramp, beautiful custom design, safe. We'd even paid an extra fee to get the approval processed quicker. But apparently, the color of the railing did not match the aesthetic harmony of adjacent properties. That was the exact wording. Aesthetic harmony. As if accessibility was a threat to the neighborhood's design theme. Ryan immediately wrote an email clarifying everything. We attached documents, approvals, even a copy of the contractor's signed blueprints. A week later, we received a follow-up. "We appreciate your documentation. However, going forward, please consult the HOA prior to any visual alterations." No apology, no retraction, just a gentle slap on the wrist for daring to expect our daughter to enter her own home independently. From then on, it was a steady trickle. Our driveway was slightly longer than the average in the community, a feature that attracted us to the property in the first place. It gave us room to safely unload Emily's medical equipment and help her into our van. But one morning, we found a printed note taped to our garage. Parking reminder: extended vehicle parking beyond curb space may obstruct neighbor visibility and violate community standards. We looked around. There were trucks, RVs, even a boat parked in front of other homes. No one else had a warning. And yet, somehow we did. It wasn't long before the passive-aggressive behavior began spilling over into the HOA meetings. We tried to stay involved, attend every session, take notes, stay updated. But Karen dominated every conversation like a conductor with an orchestra. She dictated the rhythm and tone, and if you didn't follow, you were silenced. Literally, she once cut off Ryan mid-sentence during a community Q&A. "Let's keep comments brief, Mr. Thompson. We have a lot to cover tonight." His question? Whether the HOA could install better lighting on the West Path, where Emily nearly tripped in the dark. Every suggestion we made was met with, "We'll take it under consideration." But when other families asked for new flower beds, a speed bump near the playground, or a dog walking area, it was approved before the next sunrise. We realized quickly that it wasn't about what was best for the community. It was about who asked. Karen controlled everything: the landscaping contracts, newsletter content, even the font style for community signs. And the most terrifying part? She had people supporting her, not because they liked her, but because they feared her. Nobody wanted to end up on Karen's bad side. We were already there. Then came the swing set incident. Emily loved the accessible swing at the community park. It had a high backrest and belt straps for safety, and she'd spend hours there sketching clouds, listening to music, just enjoying the breeze. It gave her freedom. But one morning, we arrived to find it gone. No warning, no explanation, just an empty post where it once hung. I called the HOA office in a panic, thinking maybe it was broken, maybe they were repairing it. What I got instead was Karen's voice on the phone. "Calm. Cold. Oh, yes, we had that removed." It didn't match the rest of the playground set. The color was too bright, and the straps were creating a cluttered look. "We're working on a more uniform design." "A uniform design?" I asked, disbelief coating every syllable. "That was a disability-accessible swing." "Yes, but it wasn't approved by the HOA for permanent installation. We'll consider replacement options next quarter, pending funding." I wanted to scream. My daughter wasn't clutter. She wasn't an eyesore. She was a child with the right to enjoy the same park as everyone else. But when I brought it up at the next HOA meeting, Karen responded with her signature smile. "We understand your daughter's needs are unique, but we must maintain cohesion for all residents." Cohesion, uniformity, aesthetic harmony. Those words haunted me. The emotional toll began to build quietly. Emily stopped going to the park. She started asking questions like, "Do they think I'm not normal? And did I ruin the neighborhood?" She never cried, that wasn't her way. But the light in her eyes dimmed just a little. Her art shifted. The bright blues and yellows she loved gave way to darker tones, rigid lines, stormy skies. I noticed. I knew what it meant. So did Ryan. Meanwhile, the isolation grew. Families that once greeted us began waving from a distance, if they waved at all. Children no longer rang our doorbell, asking if Emily could come out. She noticed. She always noticed. Even inside our home, we couldn't escape the pressure. Karen started making random inspections, claiming she was just ensuring community compliance. She once asked to inspect the backyard because a neighbor complained about unusual noise. The noise? Emily laughing during water play? That's all. Just a disabled girl laughing. Apparently, even joy had to be regulated. We were stuck. Moving wasn't an option. Financially, emotionally, logistically. We'd sunk everything into this house, into this dream. And Karen knew it. That's what made her bold. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was reminding us we didn't belong, that our daughter didn't fit their mold. It was a slow suffocation, death by paper cuts and clipped smiles. We didn't realize it then, but she was setting the stage for something far worse. The signs were there, etched into every warning letter, buried in every fake compliment, sewn into the fabric of every policy. This wasn't just about property values or picket fences. It was about power, and the storm, both outside and inside our home, was just beginning to brew. It started like any other summer afternoon in our town, humid, slow, and a little too still, like the sky was holding its breath. The weather app had flashed a yellow warning banner around noon: severe thunderstorm watch, high winds, and lightning expected. Nothing unusual for July. We'd lived through our share of thunderclaps and downpours. But this storm would change everything. By 3 p.m., clouds had begun to gather like angry fists above the neighborhood. I was stuck at work across town, glued to the clock, and hoping traffic wouldn't hold me back. Ryan had been called into an emergency shift at the hospital. Emily was home, safe and secure, just finishing up her online art class. She texted me a photo of her latest watercolor, a stormy ocean under a glowing moon, strangely prophetic in hindsight. I smiled, replied with a dozen heart emojis, and told her to keep the doors locked until I got back. Our home had always been Emily's haven. She knew her routine. She was independent in ways that always surprised people: precise, calm, responsible. The storm hadn't even started yet, but I had already called her to double check. "You have your emergency bag by the door, right, sweetheart?" She replied like she always did: "I'm not a baby, Mom." And she wasn't. She was 10 going on 30. But even 30-year-olds shouldn't have had to deal with what came next. At 3:47 p.m., Emily heard the knock. She rolled toward the front door, hesitated, and looked through the peephole. Karen, holding a clipboard, wearing her HOA windbreaker like she was some sort of official. Emily didn't open the door, not right away. She called me first. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but unsure. "Karen's here." I stiffened, instantly gripped the steering wheel tighter as I merged into traffic. "Don't open the door," I said quickly. "Whatever it is, it can wait until I get home. Do you hear me?" But I was already too late. "I think she sees me," Emily whispered. "She's waving at the porch stuff. She's pointing at the umbrella and the swing, her swing, the one we set up just for her, safely anchored, fully approved months ago. Karen had already tried to have it removed once before." I started to respond, but Emily gasped, "Wait, she's walking around the side. Mom, she's going to the back gate." I could hear her voice tighten. She was scared. "Okay, honey, listen to me," I said, trying to stay calm. "Go to your room. Lock the door. I'll be home in 10 minutes. Just stay inside. Don't talk to her." But Emily was already on the move. She rolled toward the back, peeking through the curtains, just as Karen unlatched the community-maintained side gate that led to our backyard. We'd reported her trespassing before, but nothing had come of it. She always had some excuse: inspecting fence alignment, checking drain compliance. But this time was different. This time, she was holding a padlock in her hand. Emily cracked the back door open, calling out from the threshold, "You're not allowed back here." Karen turned to her, calmly brushing rainwater off her shoulders. The drizzle had begun. "I left 3 notices," she said curtly. "These items need to be removed before the storm intensifies. Section 9B of the HOA code clearly states, 'I'm not allowed to lift heavy things,'" Emily said. "My mom's on her way." Karen gave her that tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. "Then I suggest you start with the umbrella and swing. They pose a danger to others. Community safety is everyone's responsibility, Emily." I don't know what made her do it. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the fear of another complaint. Maybe she just wanted Karen to go away. Whatever it was, my daughter, my brave, thoughtful girl, wheeled herself outside. Into the wind. Into the rain. I was still 5 minutes away. By then, the thunder had started rolling in like distant drums. The clouds darkened. The wind picked up. Emily reached for the small porch umbrella, struggling to pull it loose with her limited dexterity. She slipped once, the umbrella toppling beside her. Karen stood back, watching like a teacher supervising a detention, not offering help, not even holding the umbrella. I was still 5 minutes away. And then, the unthinkable. Emily tried to roll back toward the door, cold, wet, arms shaking from the effort. She called out, "I'm done. Can I go inside now?" Karen didn't answer. She walked to the gate and slammed it shut behind her. A loud clack echoed as she twisted the lock into place. Locked. From the outside. Karen didn't look back. Emily froze. I can only imagine what must have gone through her head. The storm was now full force. Lightning sliced through the sky, thunder cracked a second later, and the wind tore through the trees with savage force. Rain slammed down sideways, soaking her instantly. She tried to maneuver toward the covered porch, but struggled against the gusts and uneven surface. One of her wheels caught on a crack in the pavers. She was stuck. She screamed for help. No one came. Neighbors peered through their blinds. Some watched, some turned away, but no one opened a door. No one called out. No one moved. By the time I skidded into the driveway, the storm was nearly unbearable. I sprinted out, heart hammering, clothes drenched in seconds, calling Emily's name at the top of my lungs. No answer, just the wind. And then, a flicker of movement near the side gate. Her chair. I ran to her, barely able to see through the sheets of rain. She was slumped forward, shivering violently, her lips pale, her fingers blue. "Oh my God, Emily!" I screamed, collapsing to my knees beside her. She was conscious, barely. I pulled her blanket from the van and wrapped her in it, frantically trying to assess her condition. Her speech was slurred, her breaths shallow. I carried her to the van, every second feeling like an eternity, called 911, called Ryan, called the world. When we reached the ER, doctors told us Emily was in early stage hypothermia. 10 more minutes, the nurse said quietly, and this could have been very different. It wasn't until later, when I checked the security footage from the neighbor's doorbell cam, that I saw the full picture. Karen, calm, dry, locking the gate with a faint smile on her lips. Not a trace of guilt, not a flicker of remorse. She hadn't just left Emily outside, she had trapped her, and she did it to make a point. She wanted us to know who was in charge. She wanted us to fear her rules. And she wanted to remind our family, our daughter, that no matter how much we tried to blend in, we would always be different. But this time, she went too far. This time, the storm wasn't just outside. It was rising inside us, too. The drive to the hospital was a blur of windshield wipers, flashing hazard lights, and desperate prayers whispered between sobs. Emily was curled in the back seat, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her tiny frame trembling uncontrollably, her eyes half shut. I kept reaching back at every red light to touch her leg, whispering, "Stay with me. Baby, just stay with me." She couldn't respond. Her lips were blue. Her skin was icy. And I could see the panic in her eyes, even through the fog of exhaustion and cold. My daughter, my strong, brilliant, unbreakable little girl, looked utterly broken. At the ER, the nurses moved fast. They wheeled her in, stripped off her soaked clothes, wrapped her in heated blankets, and inserted in four with practiced urgency. The doctor came in moments later, his expression grim as he checked her vitals. "Early hypothermia," he said quietly, glancing at me with a look I'll never forget. "She's stable for now." But had it been much longer, he didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew. My knees gave out, and I collapsed into the chair beside her bed, burying my face in my hands. I wanted to scream, cry, break something, but mostly I just wanted to trade places with her. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and soaked from running through the parking lot. When he saw Emily wrapped like a fragile flower in hospital blankets, monitors beeping beside her, something in him cracked. He didn't speak. He just stood at the foot of the bed, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. His silence said more than words ever could. As the nurses worked around us, I pulled out my phone and began texting our closest neighbors. Most of them hadn't seen anything, or so they said. A few expressed sympathy, but didn't offer more than that. But then, just before midnight, I got a message from Celia. Celia lived 2 houses down, quiet, older, always polite but distant. We'd waved to her a dozen times, exchanged pleasantries, but never really talked. Her message was short. "I think I have something on my Ring camera. Do you want it?" My hands shook as I typed, "Yes, please, anything." 10 minutes later, a video file landed in my inbox. I opened it with trembling fingers, holding my breath. And what I saw took the breath right out of me. The footage was from earlier that afternoon, taken from Celia's porch. It showed the community walkway and the side gate to our backyard. The timestamp read 3:55 p.m., just minutes before I arrived. Rain was already falling hard. The wind was picking up, and there in the frame was Karen. She stood under a large black umbrella, perfectly dry, facing our yard. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't panicking. She was just watching, hands folded calmly, her expression unreadable. Then Emily appeared in the shot. My daughter, struggling to push her wheelchair up the uneven walkway, soaked to the skin, her hair clinging to her face, her arms shaking from effort. She paused near the locked gate and began calling out, though the camera didn't capture sound. I could see her mouth forming the words. She was begging, pleading, and Karen didn't move. She didn't even flinch. At one point, Emily's chair tilted sideways slightly, one wheel caught on the edge of a brick. She tried to fix it herself, tugging and adjusting with her hands. It was obvious she was in distress. She was scared, cold, alone. Still, Karen stood there, watching. After a moment, she took one slow step back. Then another. Then she turned and walked away. She left my daughter there, to suffer, to struggle, to freeze. I watched the entire clip twice before I could speak. Ryan stood beside me, his face growing redder with every frame. When it ended, he exhaled sharply and punched the wall beside him, leaving a dent in the beige hospital paint. A nurse peeked in from the hallway, but I waved her off. We were both shaking, me from rage, him from grief. This wasn't an accident, I whispered. She knew. She saw her. She walked away on purpose. Ryan nodded, jaw clenched. She wanted to prove something. And that was the moment the truth became undeniable. This hadn't been a lapse in judgment. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional cruelty. Karen didn't want Emily's swing. Karen didn't want Emily's ramp. Karen didn't want Emily in her neighborhood at all. And she used that storm, a natural disaster, as a chance to make a statement. She wanted power. She wanted submission. And she thought the best way to get it was to hurt a child. I sent the video to the HOA board that night with a single sentence. Explain this. By morning, no one had responded. Not Karen. Not the board. Silence. But I wasn't staying silent. I posted the clip online, just to my private social feed at first for family and close friends. But people started sharing, commenting. Outrage began to swell like the storm itself. Mothers, fathers, teachers, disability advocates. They all saw the same thing we did, a woman in power standing idle while a child suffered. By evening, the clip had spread to local forums and neighborhood groups. And that was just the beginning. The truth was out. And no matter how Karen tried to spin it, deny it, deflect it, the footage didn't lie. She had stood there and done nothing. She left my daughter in the storm to prove a point. And now, we were going to make one of our own. The hospital discharged Emily 2 days after the storm, but she didn't come home the same child. Her body had stabilized. No lasting damage, the doctor said, but something deeper had been shaken loose inside her. She was quiet in a way that didn't feel like rest. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. She stopped drawing, stopped humming to herself. She didn't even want to go near the window. And when I asked if she wanted to sit outside on the porch with me, just the two of us, no HOA, no Karen, she shook her head slowly and whispered, "It's not safe out there." My daughter had always been braver than most adults I knew. But now she flinched when she heard thunder. She rolled her chair with hesitation, like the world itself had turned hostile. And worst of all, she stopped talking. For 3 days, not a single word. I tried everything. Her favorite books. Her favorite music. I even brought her markers and sketch pad to the hospital bed, hoping the colors would coax something out. But she just stared at them blankly, as if they didn't belong to her anymore. Ryan and I took turns pretending we were strong. At night, we traded roles, crying in the kitchen while the other held it together in her room. We barely slept. The image of her soaked and shaking in that wheelchair played on a loop in our minds, over and over. And knowing someone chose to leave her there, that made it unbearable. But what followed was almost worse. When I posted the video, I thought we were doing the right thing, shedding light on what happened, letting people see the truth. But within 24 hours, the HOA board emailed us. Your recent social media post constitutes a breach of HOA guidelines under community defamation and digital harassment clauses. Please remove the video and issue a formal apology within 48 hours to avoid legal consequences. No apology for what happened to Emily. No concern. No investigation. Just threats. Control. Silence. And then Karen responded. She didn't call. She didn't stop by. No. She wrote a newsletter. The next HOA email bulletin included a carefully worded statement from her, labeled "From the desk of the president." It read like a political spin, every line soaked in manipulation. It deeply saddens me that certain residents are using a natural weather emergency to stir divisiveness and public hostility. The safety of our neighborhood remains my top priority. However, I will not tolerate emotional manipulation, nor the spread of edited footage to malign community leaders. We all suffered through the storm. Let's not let drama overshadow unity. Emotional manipulation. She used those exact words to describe what happened to my disabled daughter. She called it drama, as if we had staged it, as if Emily's hypothermia was part of some vendetta. That line alone hit like a knife. But the damage was done. The neighbors read her words. Some believed her. Others didn't want to get involved. Overnight, our world changed. People who once waved at us began crossing the street to avoid eye contact. The few friendly families we'd connected with now gave tight, polite nods and then hurried inside. No more invitations. No more small talk. It was like we had a plague no one wanted to touch. Even Emily noticed. She stared out the window one morning, watching a neighborhood girl ride past on her bike. She didn't wave, she murmured. It was the first thing she'd said in days. I smiled weakly. Maybe she didn't see you. She always sees me, Emily replied, then turned away. We were alone now, not just emotionally, but in every real, practical way. Our HOA dues had gone up again, this time due to community legal reserve adjustments. Our access to the community center was temporarily suspended due to a pending review. The neighborhood maintenance crew didn't trim our lawn that week. When I called to ask why, they told me they'd been redirected by HOA leadership. It was punishment. Plain and simple. We were the villains now for speaking up, for exposing the truth. And behind it all, Karen still reigned, still walked her dog past our house twice a day, still wore that smug half-smile every time she passed our mailbox. She even had the audacity to wave at me once. A slow, mocking wave. Our legal bills started mounting. We'd consulted with a lawyer about filing a formal complaint, even a civil suit, but the HOA had a legal team ready and funded by years of community fees. We were just one family, and with Emily's medical bills coming in, emergency transport, hospital care, post-trauma counseling, our savings were evaporating. But the emotional cost, that was worse. There were nights Emily woke up crying, not screaming, just softly sobbing, like she didn't want us to hear. She clutched her blanket and whispered, "I don't want to live here anymore." And we didn't blame her. We didn't either. But where do you go when your own home becomes a cage? We tried so hard to protect her, to give her a normal life. But this place, the place that promised community and safety, had turned its back on her, on us. And in doing so, it carved a scar that would never truly fade. Karen didn't just leave our daughter outside in a storm. She left her believing the world was cruel. And for the first time in our lives, we were starting to believe it too. The silence of the neighborhood was deafening. But inside our home, something had changed. We were no longer shell-shocked. We were angry. We were focused. And we were ready to fight. The morning after Emily whispered, "I don't want to live here anymore," I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for pity. I was looking for power. I began researching civil rights attorneys, specifically those with experience in HOA discrimination and disability law. After a dozen phone calls and voicemails, I finally found someone who didn't just listen, he cared. His name was David Klein, a civil litigation attorney based just 2 counties over. He sounded calm, confident, and quietly furious after I explained what happened. What Karen did is not just morally wrong, he said. Depending on what we uncover, it might be a violation of the Fair Housing Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and state-level negligence laws. But we'll need more than emotion. We'll need evidence. I was ready. David asked me to start compiling everything, every email, every HOA notice, every photo of Emily's ramp, every voice recording, every text message from Karen or the HOA. I turned our kitchen into a war room. I printed documents, built timelines, annotated dates. Ryan joined me late at night after his hospital shifts, flipping through HOA bylaws with a highlighter and a fury I'd never seen in his eyes before. But that was only the beginning. David said we needed to establish a pattern to show that this wasn't an isolated incident born out of a bad judgment call in a storm. We had to prove intentional bias, a culture of exclusion, a power trip turned dangerous. So we started reaching out. It wasn't easy. Most of the neighbors avoided us now, but not all of them. Mr. Carter, an elderly gentleman who'd lived in the community since it was built, agreed to meet us privately. He leaned across the table at the local diner and said in a low voice, "I don't trust that woman. Never have." He told us about a family that used to live 2 doors down from him, a multiracial couple with twin boys, one of whom had autism. They were sweet people, kept to themselves, mostly. But Karen went after them like a dog on a bone. Complaints about noise, about chalk drawings, even said the boys were causing disruption at the playground. Eventually, they sold their home and moved out. He wasn't the only one. David contacted a few former HOA board members and managed to speak with one who'd resigned the year prior. We'll call her Jessica for her privacy. What she told us made my blood run cold. Jessica had served on the board for 2 years. At first, she thought Karen was just strict, obsessive about order and landscaping, sure, but professional. That illusion shattered after she challenged one of Karen's emergency votes that suspended a resident's community privileges over a minor issue. The resident? A single mother whose teenage son used a wheelchair and kept a ramp at their front door, non-conforming structure, Karen had called it. When Jessica opposed the motion, Karen called her privately and threatened her with legal action for defamation if she spoke out against the HOA president again. Jessica resigned the next month. I couldn't stand to watch her weaponize the rules against people who couldn't fight back, she said, her voice shaking. With David's help, we built a case that went far beyond Emily's trauma. It was a case about systematic abuse of power. The kind that hides behind bylaws and fake smiles. The kind that dresses itself up as community protection while quietly excluding anyone who doesn't fit a mold. David filed a formal demand letter to the HOA board outlining the following: violation of the Fair Housing Act for discrimination based on disability negligence and endangerment for willfully ignoring a child's medical condition during a weather emergency, intentional infliction of emotional distress, for Karen's continued pattern of harassment civil penalties, including damages for medical bills, emotional trauma, legal fees, and public defamation. The letter gave them 2 weeks to respond. Silence would be taken as refusal and trigger formal litigation. Karen responded predictably. She didn't apologize. She didn't even admit fault. Instead, she forwarded the letter to the rest of the community with a bold title: "The HOA is under attack. Let's defend our neighborhood." She painted us as opportunists, claimed we were trying to exploit a tragic weather event for personal gain. She even accused us of weaponizing a child's condition to tear apart the unity of our community. Unity? The community was crumbling under the weight of her manipulation, but the tide had already begun to turn. The footage from Celia's camera had circulated beyond social media. A local news outlet picked it up, then another. Soon, a national disability rights organization contacted us, offering support. They'd seen too many stories like this, but rarely one caught so clearly on video. People who had once avoided us began knocking on our door again. Some came to apologize. Others came to share stories. Turns out, Karen had been ruling through fear for years. She'd threatened lawsuits, fines, even foreclosure on elderly couples who disagreed with her. But no one had stood up until now. The HOA board, under pressure from both the media and the legal filing, held a closed-door emergency session. 2 members resigned. A third reached out privately and told us we didn't know how bad it had gotten. Karen silenced anyone who opposed her, but the board is crumbling. People are finally seeing it. And then the final twist. One of the HOA's administrative assistants came forward anonymously at first. Through David, she confirmed that Karen had deliberately delayed emergency response policies during the storm. Our home was marked as non-priority for safety check-ins, despite being flagged in earlier HOA records as housing a disabled child. Karen had changed the order herself. It was premeditated. She had seen the forecast. She had locked the gate. And she had left our daughter in the storm, not out of panic, not out of confusion, but out of pure, calculated spite. The legal process was still unfolding. These things take time. But we had something we never had before. We had proof. We had support. And for the first time in weeks, we had hope. Karen may have built her reign on silence and intimidation. But now we were speaking louder. It was a Tuesday evening, humid, tense, the kind of air that sticks to your skin and weighs on your chest. Word had spread that the HOA board was calling a special emergency community meeting in response to recent media attention and internal grievances. The phrasing was intentionally vague, but everyone knew what it was really about: Karen and us. We arrived early, but the room was already half full. Rows of folding chairs lined the community clubhouse, the same place where Karen had once led her reign of passive-aggressive tyranny. Now, the space was buzzing with whispers. For the first time, people weren't looking away. They were looking at her. Karen stood near the front, poised as always. Crisp blouse, sleek ponytail, clipboard in hand like nothing had happened. She nodded to a few board members, even smiled at 1 or 2 residents. But the usual air of confidence was thinning, her smile too tight, her movements slightly rigid. Her eyes flicked toward us the moment we entered, but she quickly looked away. Cameras were set up in the back of the room. 2 local news stations had been granted access to Record, the community's right to transparency. They'd argued, and the board had agreed, begrudgingly. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was public interest. David, our attorney, stood beside us, quiet and observant. He didn't need to say anything. We were ready. The meeting was called to order by a board member named Marcus, a middle-aged man with a long sigh behind his voice. Tonight, we're here to address concerns raised about recent events during the July 3rd storm. We'll allow both statements and evidence from involved parties. Karen was the first to speak. She stood slowly, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "Thank you, Marcus," she began, voice smooth as silk. "I appreciate the chance to clarify recent events which, I believe, have been drastically mischaracterized in both tone and fact." She pulled out a printed statement and began reading. "I have always upheld the HOA code with integrity and fairness. During the storm, I acted in accordance with emergency preparedness procedures. My intention was not to harm or endanger anyone, but to ensure that all residents, all, were maintaining safety standards. The child in question exited the house of her own volition. I neither directed nor forced her to do so. What's been circulating online is an edited video with no sound, taken out of context. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Doubt, discomfort. But Karen continued, "We are a community of order, and emotional narratives should not cloud our judgment. I urge everyone here to think critically and not allow personal sentiment to dismantle the very rules that keep this neighborhood safe and beautiful." When she finished, she gave a tight, satisfied nod and sat. And then it was our turn. David stepped forward, holding a flash drive. With the board's permission, he said, "We'd like to play the full, unedited video from a neighbor's Ring camera, along with a brief statement from the child affected." The board agreed. The lights dimmed slightly and the video began. For 87 seconds, the room was silent. The footage played in full, no cuts, no editing. Karen locking the gate, Emily struggling, Karen watching, and then walking away. No one moved. When the lights came back up, the room felt different. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few sat stunned, mouths parted slightly as if they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Karen shifted in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. And then Emily spoke. She hadn't said much in weeks, barely above a whisper since the day of the storm. But now, with Ryan beside her and her sketchbook resting on her lap like armor, she wheeled herself slowly to the front. She looked small, fragile, but when she raised her voice, it was clear and unwavering. I didn't want to go outside, she said, but I was scared not to. She told me I had to, that I was endangering the neighborhood. I was wet and cold, and when I asked to go back inside, she walked away. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I thought I was going to die out there, and nobody came. A heavy silence swallowed the room whole. You could hear sniffles, throats being cleared. Someone in the back said quietly, "My God." She turned her chair back around and returned her seat. David looked to the board. We're not here for revenge. We're here for accountability. And we're here to make sure this never happens to another child ever again. The board called a vote. No long debate. No delay. All in favor of removing Karen McMillan from the HOA presidency, effective immediately. Hands rose, one after another, until nearly every member had voted. Karen's face barely moved, just a subtle twitch near the corner of her eye. Her clipboard slid from her lap and landed on the floor with a quiet clack. She didn't bother to pick it up. Marcus nodded. Effective today, Karen McMillan is no longer affiliated with the HOA in any leadership capacity. Further review of policy abuses will be handled by outside counsel. Karen stood slowly. The cameras zoomed in. For a moment, she seemed to glance around, searching for someone, anyone who would stand with her. No one did. Not a word. Not a gesture. Just the soft sound of her footsteps echoing as she walked out of the room. The board turned to us next. We're opening a formal investigation into all HOA actions under Karen's tenure, Marcus said, and we welcome input from any residents who were affected. David nodded. We'll also be proceeding with civil action. That video is evidence of negligence and emotional harm. The law will have its say. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Residents approached us, not all, but many. Some came to apologize, others to offer support, and a few with watery eyes simply said, "Thank you for standing up." That night, as we wheeled Emily back to the car, she looked up at the stars, clear and calm now, no storm in sight, and whispered, "I feel brave again." And for the first time since that terrible day, so did we. It's been 6 months since the storm, the one that tore through our skies and through our lives. In some ways, it feels like yesterday. In others, it feels like a lifetime ago. The rain may have stopped, but the echoes of that night still linger. And yet, through the wreckage, something unexpected began to grow. Healing. Emily is doing better. Not magically, not all at once, but step by step, smile by smile. Therapy helped. So did art. She started painting again, but this time, the colors came slowly. At first, she only used grays and blues. Then one day, a burst of yellow appeared in the center of her canvas. "It's the sun trying to come back," she told me. That's when I knew she was healing, not just from the cold or the fear, but from the feeling of being unseen, unprotected. We stayed in the neighborhood, not because we had to, but because we chose to. Moving would have meant running, and we didn't want to teach Emily that you had to leave to be safe. Instead, we fought. We stood up, and in doing so, we watched a quiet shift ripple through the community. Some neighbors, the ones who once looked the other way, began looking toward us. A family down the street offered to help repair our fence after a heavy wind. A teenager volunteered to help Emily with her garden bed. Even Mr. Carter installed a little birdhouse in her honor, painted in her favorite colors. Little things, small gestures, but in the quiet, they spoke volumes. Karen? She moved out quietly a month after the lawsuit was filed. No big announcement, no farewell. just a for sale sign that went up one morning and was gone the next. The house is empty now, overgrown. Still, sometimes I catch myself glancing at it, half expecting her to walk out with that clipboard. But she doesn't. She's gone. What stayed behind, though, is something stronger. The HOA has restructured entirely. New leadership, new policies, transparency. And for the first time, residents are attending meetings not out of fear, but because they want to contribute. A new community inclusion committee was formed, and Emily was asked to help design its first welcome sign. This is a place for everyone. She cried when she saw her name signed in the corner. As for us, we've changed too. We're stronger, tighter, the kind of strong that only comes from surviving something no family should ever endure. Ryan still can't look at the footage without shaking, but he's more protective now, more vocal. I've become a quiet advocate for families with children like Emily. I've spoken at 3 town halls. I've helped draft policy templates for inclusive housing practices. None of this was part of our plan, but maybe it was part of our purpose. Looking back, we didn't want revenge. We never did. We wanted to be safe. We wanted to be heard. We wanted to make sure no one ever left a child in the cold just to prove a point again. We didn't choose this fight, but we finished it. And now, as the seasons change and the air feels a little lighter, I sit with Emily on the porch, her swing back in place, her smile warm as the sun overhead. And I realize storms don't always leave behind destruction. Sometimes they clear the way for something new to grow. If this story moved you, if it made you feel angry, seen, or simply reminded you of how power can be misused behind white fences and HOA bylaws, then we urge you to take a stand. HOA harassment is real, and it doesn't just happen in headlines. It happens quietly to families like ours every single day. If you or someone you know has experienced discrimination, bullying, or emotional abuse at the hands of a homeowners association or neighborhood leadership, don't stay silent. Share your story. Leave a comment below and tell us what happened. Let your voice be heard, because silence is exactly what these people count on. We're building a community that exposes injustice, that fights back with truth, and that refuses to let families suffer behind closed doors. Subscribe to HOA Karen Shorts for more real, raw, and powerful stories of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary cruelty. Every video we post is based on true events shared to shine a light where others prefer darkness. Because sometimes the people meant to protect the neighborhood become the ones you need protection from. Let's hold them accountable together. Welcome to the resistance. Welcome to HOA Karen Shorts.